43 Americans killed in a single day, billions of dollars flowing through a Pentagon that still can't pass a basic audit, and inside the ranks of the U.S. military, a culture struggling to root out one of its darkest crises.
Heads.
U.S. Presteri is to the Tencherstitil. What unfolded in this Senate hearing wasn't just another round of political sparring, it was a window into how fragile America's security really is. Because the threats aren't only coming from Tehran or Hamas rockets in the Middle East, they're also coming from within unkept promises, broken systems, and questions of trust that no amount of firepower can fix.
Senator Blumenthal. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary, and thank you, Chairman, for being here. Ms. McDonnell, I'm actually going to have a question for you. So thank you very much for being here. And I know that Iran is on our minds right now. And Secretary, I'll just pose a very quick question to you. October 7th, 2023, Hamas attacked Israel. Who is the primary funder of Hamas?
Senator, it is Iran.
And who is the primary sponsor then that provides them with the weapons that they use to attack Israel?
Same answer, ma'am.
And maybe our public is not aware, but 43 Americans lost their lives on October 7th at the hands of Hamas, which is an Iran-backed terrorist organization. 43 Americans. We never talk about it, folks. I heard nothing about this in the Biden administration. So when there is question about whether it's appropriate for America to be engaged in the Middle East in defending Americans that live and work abroad, I think there's our answer. So thank you, Secretary. I'll start with the Secretary, then I'll come to you, Ms. McDonnell. Secretary Hegseth, I do want to thank you because we've had many discussions about this. You have appointed Steve Erickson as the Executive Director of Force Resiliency, and he will oversee the Department's Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, what we know as SAPRO. And he will directly report to you on the issue of sexual assault within our military. And you've been very responsive on this issue, and I commend you for that. And I have already received my first briefing by Mr. Erickson. So to continue building on this progress, I'm going to hold quarterly meetings with the SAPRO, and we want to make sure that we continue the momentum that we are seeing within the department on that. And Secretary Hegseth, from your vantage point, what positive trends are you seeing out of SAPRO?
Well, first of all, Senator, I want to thank you and other members of this committee for the work you've done on that issue. And I think in large part, and you'll see this in this budget, we continue to fund the programs which have seen efficacy. And so I think a lot of these were newer programs, new initiatives, new emphasis put in place that we have simply sought to maintain and accelerate. And you see that in this budget. And thankfully, we've seen this year sexual assault numbers decrease. One is too many, as we've said before, but a decrease is a good trend to see. We want to continue that.
Wonderful, and we'll continue working with the department on that. And an amendment that I am going to propose for this year's NDAA would require quarterly briefings from the SAPRO for members of Congress, just as they do with suicide prevention. So we'll continue working on that. I also would love to touch upon a number of other issues I've worked as far when it comes to fiscal sanity within the department. I can submit those for the record because I do want to give Ms. McDonnell an opportunity. Let's talk about an audit. I love working with the comptrollers out there, but GAO released a report warning that the Department of Defense is unlikely to achieve a clean audit by 2028, citing longstanding financial management weaknesses. And it's my understanding that a key issue in the department's continued reliance on outdated business and feeder systems that lack internal controls continues to contribute to that. So to help address that, in the reconciliation package, we have $350 million that will be dedicated and directed toward improving audit outcomes across the department. So, Ms. McDonald, all to you. Can you walk us through how the department intends to meet its statutory requirement of achieving that clean audit by 2028?
Thank you for the question, Senator, and thank you for your support in reconciliation for automation, AI, and business system replacement to achieve the audit. The first day we came in, that was one of the first topics the Secretary and I discussed, and he actually just put out a memo with guidance for milestones each fiscal year that the department is going to achieve the financial audit by 2028 or sooner, as he has challenged us to do. The Marine Corps just passed their second clean audit opinion. 2 additional components have done the same recently. And within the next 3 years, under the Secretary's guidance, the remainder of the department will achieve the clean audit opinion.
Well, outstanding. We really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for your service to our great nation.
Thank you very much, Senator Ernst.
And the answers given that day revealed something most Americans were never supposed to hear. When Senator Joni Ernst asked the question, the answer came quickly, too quickly. Who funds Hamas? Iran. Who supplies them with weapons? Iran again. There was no hesitation, no hedging, because the truth was undeniable. Tehran's fingerprints were all over the October 7th attack that left 43 Americans dead, a reminder that terrorism abroad doesn't stop at Israel's borders, it reaches directly into American lives. For Ernst, this wasn't about abstract geopolitics or endless Middle East debates. She wanted the public to see that disengagement isn't an option. If Iran bankrolls the rockets and fuels the fighters, then every American abroad becomes a potential target, and that changes the stakes. This isn't just Israel's war, it's our fight too. The message cut through the chamber with precision. Tehran doesn't just fund chaos, it exports it. And when American citizens pay the ultimate price, silence or retreat becomes impossible to justify. Ernst's line of questioning forced everyone listening to confront a grim reality. Pulling back from the Middle East doesn't insulate America from danger, it invites it. But as the room weighed those words, the conversation pivoted sharply, because if foreign adversaries threaten lives overseas, another crisis is already threatening the trust and safety of America's own soldiers here at home. The shift in tone was striking. One moment the discussion was about Iranian rockets, the next it was about a battlefield inside America's own military, sexual assault in the ranks. Senator Ernst, herself a veteran, made it clear this wasn't an issue that could be brushed aside. She pressed Secretary Pete Hegseth on what was being done, and he pointed to the appointment of Steve Erickson as the new Executive Director of Force Resiliency. His job oversee the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, known as SAPRO, and report directly to the Secretary. Quarterly meetings, new programs, dedicated funding, the blueprint sounded strong. And yet a shadow lingered over the entire exchange. Promises like these have been made before. Task forces, new titles, new offices. Each rollout came with bold language, but too often the results fell flat, buried under layers of bureaucracy and cultural resistance. For Ernst, this was personal. A military that can't protect its own service members undermines not just morale, but the moral authority it claims to project overseas. Progress had been reported, with a decrease in sexual assault cases, but even Hegseth admitted, one case is one too many. And as Ernst made clear, accountability can't stop with announcements. Real oversight is the only way to make change stick. Senator Ernst didn't stop at praise or polite acknowledgments. She knew that without teeth, reforms often dissolve into little more than speeches. That's why she proposed something sharper, tying the National Defense Authorization Act directly to quarterly briefings from SAPRO. In other words, if the Pentagon wanted its funding, it would have to sit down with Congress every few months and prove progress. This wasn't just about statistics on a chart, it was about forcing the military to answer for how it treats its own people. Ernst framed it as a matter of trust. If commanders couldn't guarantee the safety of soldiers in uniform, how could they possibly claim credibility in defending citizens abroad? The link was deliberate. Internal accountability strengthens external power. For Congress, quarterly briefings would mean more than paperwork. They would bring transparency, create a trail, and make it harder for the Pentagon to hide behind rhetoric. Every report would be an opportunity to press harder, demand better, and expose failures that might otherwise never leave the barracks. And this demand for accountability wasn't limited to the cultural crisis. Ernst's line of questioning quickly turned toward another glaring weakness, one that had haunted the Pentagon for decades, billions of taxpayer dollars that couldn't be tracked, and a promise of an audit that always seemed just out of reach. When the conversation turned to the Pentagon's finances, the atmosphere shifted again, this time from moral outrage to disbelief. Senator Ernst highlighted a report from the Government Accountability Office warning that the Department of Defense was unlikely to achieve a clean audit by 2028. Think about that. The most powerful military on Earth, managing a budget larger than the next several nations combined, still can't balance its books. The reasons were as staggering as they were familiar. Outdated business systems, weak internal controls, a culture of business as usual where billions of dollars flow through pipelines no one can fully trace. To address it, the Pentagon promised $350 million for automation, artificial intelligence, and new accounting platforms. On paper it sounded ambitious, but the question lingered, can you really fix a cultural failure with software? Ernst pressed the issue because she understood what was at stake. Every missed audit isn't just a technical failure, it's a political liability. It signals to taxpayers that their money is vanishing into a black hole of bureaucracy, and worse, it gives critics ammunition to question whether the Pentagon can be trusted with the trillions it requests each decade. But as big as the financial crisis looked on paper, what came next raised an even deeper concern, whether reforms at the Pentagon were real or just another symbolic promise destined to fade. For decades the Pentagon has promised reform, and for decades it has failed to deliver. That's why the pledge to achieve a clean audit by 2028 struck many as more symbolic than practical. Yes, the Marine Corps recently earned a clean opinion, and a handful of other components followed suit. But when you zoom out, the track record tells a different story, one of sprawling bureaucracy and deep resistance to transparency. Skeptics argue that every new deadline is just another delay tactic, a way to buy time while problems fester. Even with $350 million earmarked for modernization, critics warn that money alone can't fix a culture that treats accountability as optional. The Pentagon has more resources than any organization on Earth, yet somehow, year after year, billions go unaccounted for. And this isn't just about bookkeeping. A clean audit would mean proving to the American people and the world that the Department of Defense can be held to the same standards as every other federal agency. Without it, the perception hardens that the military is too big, too powerful, and too insulated to face real scrutiny. Which leaves lawmakers and the public with a sobering question: if the Pentagon can't be trusted to track its own money, how can it be trusted to defend America's future? By the end of the hearing, one truth had become impossible to ignore: America's security isn't defined only by threats overseas. Yes, Iran funds Hamas, and yes, 43 Americans lost their lives because of that support. But the hearing revealed something larger, that national security also depends on what happens inside the Pentagon itself. Senator Ernst's questioning tied these threads together with precision. Foreign adversaries exploit weakness, but weakness isn't limited to missiles or drones. It's cultural failures like unchecked sexual assault in the ranks. It's financial failures like an audit that never arrives, and it's bureaucratic failures that breed mistrust, not just among service members but across the American public. For Ernst, the message was clear: strength abroad requires integrity at home. Deterrence isn't only about building more ships, planes, or weapons, it's about proving that the U.S. military can protect its own, steward taxpayer dollars responsibly, and uphold the values it claims to fight for. The stakes couldn't be higher. Every broken promise chips away at trust, every missed audit erodes legitimacy, and every unaddressed crisis invites enemies to test America's resolve. Which raises the most haunting question of all: is America's greatest vulnerability found on foreign soil, or inside its own walls? What this hearing made crystal clear is that America's definition of security has to change. It's no longer enough to point to enemies abroad and call it a day. Because yes, Iran funds terror, and yes, Americans are caught in the crossfire. But the deeper danger comes when the United States fails to confront its own weaknesses, when promises to protect soldiers fall short, when billions vanish without accountability, and when deadlines like 2028 become excuses instead of turning points. Senator Ernst's line of questioning pulled the mask off both sides of the problem. Foreign threats will always test America's strength. But unless the Pentagon proves it can protect its people, manage its money, and deliver on reform, then every missile launched overseas is paired with a question mark at home. In the end, this wasn't just about policy, it was about trust. Can Americans believe the institutions meant to defend them are as strong on the inside as they claim to be on the outside, or will the same cycles of failure continue, leaving both taxpayers and soldiers to pay the price? That's the question we're left with. What do you think? Can the Pentagon deliver this time? Let us know in the comments.